Welcome to the Haunted Hacker version 1.0. And the reason why I call it 1.0 this time is a milestone for this podcast. We do have a sponsor that came on board, a partnership with Private Internet Access VPN solution. Without further ado, we'll get into the news. Today we have Justin Beals from StrikeGraph, which I'm really interested to hear about their platform. And so I speak with ICE next month, which is really cool. I spoke for a DHS group last year, and they referred me to ICE for their cybersecurity month. So I'm speaking to all of ICE in the US coming up next month. Other than that, not a whole lot going on. If you haven't seen the Euronews video of the online gaming risk to kids that I did with Euronews, check that out. It's on their website. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. Justin, it's a pleasure having you here. It's really awesome. I know a little bit about StrikeGraph, but I didn't want to dive in too deep because I wanted to give you an opportunity to explain it and tell the audience and the listeners what exactly you do. And your career is really interesting with the startups and stuff. We have similar experience with startups. So I'll let you go ahead and take it away, and you can, introduce yourself and tell us about what you do.
Sure. First off, thanks for having me on the show, Mike. It's a pleasure to connect and chat about not only StrikeGraph, but just the broader market in which we operate. I'm the CEO and co-founder of StrikeGraph, and what StrikeGraph does is that we help B2B companies achieve security certifications to facilitate revenue. And the reason that I got really interested in this problem space is I've worked in technology for a long time, more recently kind of as a chief technology officer. And I realized all of a sudden, especially in the past 5 or 6 years, that our security posture, our ability to assess it and validate its operation was becoming a sales and marketing asset. And that was really unique. I'd never seen that before in my career. And I just really wondered how this being a problem, we could provide a solution that allowed people that maybe weren't deep security experts. I'm not. I'm much more of a product person, but we have to understand how good security is implemented and what good cybersecurity practices could be. But how I help empower a sales team to bring that great security work to the market and generate trust with our customers. Yeah.
That's really awesome. So for the listeners who are new in cybersecurity, talk a little bit about SOC 2 compliance and what that entails.
Yeah, you bet. So SOC 2 is the most common independent assessment of security practices that we see in the marketplace. And a little bit of history, SOC 2 was designed by the AICPA. They're the group that is kind of thought leadership for accountants in the certified public accountants in the United States. It is a broad security standard. So only about 40% of the standard itself focuses on cybersecurity specifically. There's the other 60% of it that we know is a critical service area like HR, certainly change management from a product management perspective. And of course, I, as our CEO, we're a SOC 2 Type 2 audited company at StrikeGraph. And as our CEO, I have control management responsibility for things like board transparency, as an example. Yeah.
So boards are really interesting. I know that you have a pretty vast background with startups. What has been your experience with advisory boards and how they communicate and operate with a company?
Yeah, so I've had the pleasure of trying both modes. I had a business that I was the sole owner of between 2000 and 2009. We had no board per se. They were mostly our customers telling us what they needed and making sure that we delivered on that. And then, of course, StrikeGraph is a venture capital backed startup. So we have investors that are board members. And then, of course, as a platform and product, we're trying to, find advisory momentum from a board. And so let's separate those two a little bit, right? Like a investor board is managing the health and growth of the business. We're voting, I need their buy-in for certain strategic initiatives that we want to take. And And so it's a community of people that's building StrikeGraph. Whereas like an advisory board might be, hey, we're going to be an advisory committee for an organization like StrikeGraph, and let's like next year we're rolling out FedRAMP, I think, support. And so
Nice.
we might form an advisory committee on what the best implementation of FedRAMP looks like for their types of organizations to advise us. Um, that type of group, it's important to listen. It's important to use them as an opportunity for referrals, for direct sales, but they don't drive the company. Whereas my board, we definitely will take decisions about capitalization opportunities, maybe critical hires that we need, and also like budgetary goals, and if we're meeting them as an organization. Yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So, what do you think the biggest pain point or the most common pain point with people going for SOC 2
Mhm.
encounter? What's the most common?
Yeah, I think the most common problem that we see is people getting checklists of activities. You're trying to be like, how can I just jump in line a little bit and just tell me what I need to do? You know,
Right.
I adore that mentality in a way. Uh, and I made that mistake as a CTO in the past. And what happened to me personally at a prior startup is that I was like, oh, I need to write all these security policies. And so I wrote a whole bunch of security policies that I was like, now how do I implement it? You know, and wait, is this all right for us? I'm not sure this fits our product or how we like to operate very well. And so I think what I realized is that security is very custom, you know, to how a company operates. And just like, you know, you when you're trying to figure out how long it will take you to engineer a product, scope is everything, right? Like if I can cut the scope down by half, it'll take half as much time. And similarly with security, we want effective security, we want to be efficacious, but we don't do more than we need to for the risks that our organization has presented. And so one of the things we really focus on is how do we fit the right security posture to your organization so we eliminate security theater and set you up for, you know, compliance so that you can have that nice certificate in the sales motion,
Right.
instead of just being, here, go write a bunch of these policies, or here's a checklist of 150 things that every company should do to be SOC 2 compliant. Yeah.
Exactly. You know, I've had mixed feelings about compliance and compliance audits for a long time. You know, being a pen tester and looking at auditing and compliance and people trying to meet that that level. I've actually seen in the past where companies would rather pay a fine than meet that compliance.
Yeah.
Does that still exist in the industry now? Do you see that ever?
I do see it like sometimes, but and this is a really interesting part of what has changed about this landscape.
Mm,
There are two types of, I think, compliance motions or motivations you could say about why you would do it. One is liability focused, like you mentioned, and like a good example of one of those standards is GDPR. You know,
mm,
you can say we're GDPR compliant. You can express that. You can not have done any work, and nothing's going to happen until someone complains to the EU Commission, and then you get a fine, right?
right.
California consumer privacy is set up in a similar way. And so we see those liability standards. They aren't big drivers from an adoption perspective, honestly. People see them as a cost and they try to minimize the actual implementation as much as possible. We like the ones that are tied to reputation and revenue. And what we've seen is not so much that if you're not SOC 2 certified, you're going to get a fine, but if you're a B2B company that shares data, the buyers of your platform want to trust you. And one of the ways of them being able to trust you is to say, I've been independently assessed on SOC 2. So that's why we think, especially about SOC 2, ISO 27001, PCI DSS, even HIPAA, as
Mhm.
almost a cost to even do business and make sales.
Right, right, absolutely. And you know, the compliance and auditing and stuff like that gets a really bad rap in the industry as well. You know, talking to people coming into the industry and what jobs they would pick, you know, auditing is usually the last one they would pick. With you know, from my point of view, I'm a pen tester, that's my background. I would be bored to nails as an auditor.
Yeah.
So it takes a special type of person for that. But I think that as an industry, compliance is something that we need to have. Unfortunately, what's really weird is that, a lot of people bang the drum for compliance and meeting certain standards, right?
Right.
But the same people who beat the drums are the same people who own these companies that don't do due diligence when it comes to patching or staying
Right.
on top of known vulnerabilities. Do you see a lot of companies that still struggle with that when they go for their SOC 2 and stuff? What's the background? What drives them to that?
Yeah. So they probably were trying to win a deal, and
Mm,
it was probably their biggest deal so far. And the buyer was like, "Oh, we're not gonna adopt you unless you're SOC 2 audited." And of
mm,
course, like on the selling side, they're deflated. They're like, "Oh, we got to do this thing." And so then, to your point, they're trying to ram it through as quickly as possible without actually implementing good practices, like let's make sure we have a patch management process, or let's make sure that we're ensuring peer review before code gets pushed into production or things like
mm,
that. So what we tell our customers, and our platform is kind of designed to really support this, is first off, our platform is designed to help you scope that security posture so you're doing the things that you realize are valuable security right off the get-go.
mm,
Then it's designed to collect evidence that you were able to do that. And so just from like, hey, we need to broadly operate security standards aside, it's a great platform for like, Mike is in charge of our black hat hacking, red team essentially, and
mm,
he has some control requirements, but he's not doing all the controls for our company. And the VP of HR, they have their control requirements.
mm.
And there might be someone that's running security broadly, is getting all that data rolled up to make sure the security processes are being operated.
Right.
And that seems more valid, right? Like you actually, from a StrikeRap perspective, you design the process around patch management. We don't design the
Right.
process for you. That's your control. And as long as you're evidencing in it, then we've really prepared you to go in front of an auditor. Now, I'll say this about the CPA firms, the big CPA firms that we've worked with. Um, I'm disappointed to find so little common understanding, not only between the different firms, but even the individuals that audit in those firms,
Mhm.
about what an appropriate solution is. And I think that this has really hurt the purchasers of audit practices, and that they're like, well, this person told me this, and this person told me something completely different. And I
Right.
don't feel like I have a stake in saying what's right for me.
Right.
And we also agree that's wrong. The auditor is a expert in assurance services and testing,
Right.
not in best security practices.
Right.
So we really drive that, and we drive that home with anyone that does audit with us, that is an audit partner, is that you're not here to test on whether they did good or bad security.
Right.
Control effectiveness is appropriate. Is the evidence supplied is appropriate? Is the standard met is appropriate? But they decide what is the best security practice for them.
That's good. Yeah, that's awesome. One of the things that I've encountered throughout the years, and especially, when it comes to meeting compliance and stuff like that, that's a really tough position as a CISO. I was in line to be a CISO. I was a CISO at a couple companies, and it's such a fine line when it comes to compliance and auditing, right? So your practices really, when it comes to the actual compliance and the audit process, it really grades those CISOs to a certain degree. How well are you providing these controls? Are you providing? To what extent? And I think that's one of the follies of that position as a CISO, because you're responsible for so many different moving parts of that organization for compliance. And
Yeah.
to me, compliance should be spread out. It usually falls onto the CTO or the CISO. But what about the HR director? What
Right.
about operations director? Like that, it should be a shared responsibility. And I think that's what's brought down the industry as a whole as far as standards and security, and why so many people are vulnerable, because it relies so much on one little group when it's actually a complete effort of the whole company.
Yeah, that's a critical feature in our solution, actually. And it's funny how differentiated it is when we've seen our competitors. We have competitors that are like, hey, we only work with the CTO or the CISO. There's one login, and they go and manage that platform, and they're in charge of compliance.
Right.
That's ridiculous, right? Like, that's not the way even good security works. let alone like we're trying to meet a standard.
Right.
We in our platform, the first step is to get you in and let's get a basic list of controls that we want to operate. The very next step is to assign those controls to an owner.
Right.
And so we fully believe that if you're going to build a better security posture, that your VP of HR is going to be in charge of onboarding, offboarding. That's their responsibility, not the CISO's. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And that's, I mean, a lot of small companies, the CISO takes so much slack.
Yeah.
They've got so much pressure and, they have to stay on top of things. It's a challenging position. And I thought at one point in my career, that's what I aspired to be, was a CISO. But
Yeah.
then I learned there was other routes to what I wanted to get to. So tell me a little bit about Justin himself. Like we just met, so I literally know nothing about you as a person. So tell us about yourself, man.
Sure. Happy to. Well, one thing I shared, obviously, I'm from Atlanta, Georgia. So shout out to all my Southerners in the room. Yeah. I learned to program when I was a little kid. Back in the day, that was the only way to get the video game on the computer. You had to like copy the code out of the magazine, and that would get it on there, and you could play. And I fell in love with it. I really liked it. I actually went to college for theater, which is probably the only business degree that I could sit through. And of course, I wanted to become a tech entrepreneur kind of after that. I didn't really have access to capital early on, and obviously I don't have a computer science degree or a well-known business degree, and so my experience was questionable. So the early businesses that I built all had to be bootstrapped, and I had a lot of failures, but a couple of good successes. I had a consulting business that I grew from my living room, just me, to about 130 consultants globally.
Wow.
We sold that in 2009, and then I've done a number of venture capital backed startups, everything from enterprise education technology to AI enabled hiring systems to what we do today at StrikeGraph.
That's awesome. So what do you think the future holds for StrikeGraph? What's your projection, your trajectory?
Yeah, so our sweet spot for customers is mid-market. There's been a gap in solutions to help that mid-market space. There's certainly like the legacy players like an RSA Archer, or the more modern group that we think of is like a Logic Gate. They're really good. And from a big enterprise top-down compliance management perspective. And there's one of the things I learned that shocked me about compliance is that in 2019, globally, $100 billion was spent on non-financial audits and audit services. And what we're doing is we're eliminating consulting from the process by essentially providing an enterprise governance risk compliance platform seated with all the content you need to design your security posture, aligned to all the standards that you might want to achieve, with a layer of intelligence so you can kind of not have to be a deep security expert to get started and get moving down the path and accomplish a SOC 2 audit, for example. So I'll tell you one trend that we see in the marketplace. I'm curious if this resonates with you, Mike, is I've talked to a lot of enterprise organizations that used to do kind of top-down security compliance management that are moving more to a bottoms-up motion where like each division that has a revenue responsibility has their own compliance track. And so we are seeing a shift on the enterprise space where we're getting adoptions of StrikeGraph division by division.
Right. And I see that quite a bit too. If you look at the history of compliance within the industry, it definitely started out with a general type compliance feel to it. But now we're getting down into the minutia. And now we're getting into different controls and different spaces and industries and different verticals. So I think that, I think that's important. I think that as far as security goes, when you look even at a cybersecurity company, you have so many different industries within that one company.
Yeah.
And I think the compliance with, financials, cybersecurity compliance, HIPAA, to me, it seems like it's being very localized within the company. Like each one has their own compliance to reach. And I think it fits right in. I think it's perfect because before too long, we're going to have a gaggle of compliances to meet.
Yeah, we are.
Standards and regulations. So that's a great way to keep track of that because not everybody's track and path is the same.
Yeah, I talked with one of our customers just 2 weeks ago, and they're SOC 2 audited. They've been using our platform for about 2 years now and been very successful. they have they do fraud detection, and they had a customer in the healthcare space reach out to them, and but they asked if they were HIPAA compliant. And they're like, well, we do fraud detection. We're really in the business of managing patient healthcare information, but now all of a sudden they need to look at HIPAA because they're starting to bring in business around this, and their system is going to start consuming that data. And, maybe some of this, Mike, is like we had this old adage about how data affects everything, or it's very fluid. And that's what's driving like new layers of compliance and standards on top of people, is like the data is very fluid. We can move it around, but it comes with a price tag of being able to
Right.
manage that effectively. Yeah.
Yeah, that's crazy too. And data security, data privacy is like super important. So I'll go ahead and transition into a little plug for the sponsors. Um, Private internet access. So VPN solution. I don't know. I'm sure you use a VPN. I use a commercial VPN at home. I use private internet access. And the reason why is because it's one of the only ones that protects your surfing. Doesn't contain logs, tries to protect the user. So if you want private internet access, which is the best commercial VPN product for your home, I would actually go to privateinternetaccess.com/haunted hacker, the way it's spelled exactly the way it sounds, and sign up. So that's my plug for private internet access. They're great people. But data privacy, let's go into that a little bit.
Sure.
What I found, especially with ransomware events, is the fact that yes, data privacy is super important, but the way that people, I guess, store data, I feel is even more important.
Hmm.
And when you look at some of the companies I've done pen tests for, they believe that once you get into a database and that database has some kind of security controls, that's a done deal. Like we're
Mm.
we're more worried about data in transit. But to me, I think the data at rest is the most important for me.
Yeah.
And there's not enough compliance around that, I don't think.
I do think that data at rest is the well, in some ways, the more valuable target to a hacker, right? Um, Data in transit is so ephemeral. You're going to get a record, as you can monitor it, but you can't really control what records you're seeing or not seeing, possibly.
Mm,
Whereas if you can suck up the whole database and all the relationships with it, that's a massive data breach.
right.
And so it's certainly the greater risk, the greater value opportunity. I was talking with a peer again in the medical space, and they said they did an analysis of the value of their database on the black market, and were shocked to realize it was worth more than $40 million. They were like, we had no idea how much the data was worth. We certainly see data access controls as a part of the standards, and encryption of data at rest, which is good. And I think that encryption of data at rest is probably a great control, because you can be like, well, if you get a copy of the data, it is encrypted if you don't have key access, and we are switching out keys. You probably know of even more esoteric ways to try and secure the database than I'm mentioning. Yeah.
Oh yeah, there's some really archaic ways of doing things that some people hold on to. I won't go too far into it because I don't want to give attackers tidbits of information, but
Good.
yeah, the practices I've seen over the years of companies, and especially when I speak about compliance, I think the most earth-shaking audit or pen test I've ever done was for a institution that relied on government funding to stay open. And they
Hmm.
had to meet a certain level of compliance, and they had to pass pen tests to maintain that level of funding.
Yeah.
And when I went into to do the pen test, I just plugged my laptop in and just basically did a packet sniff to see what was going on the wire before I even got started. And
Right.
before I even set up, I found server admin credentials flying in clear text. And they're going for compliance, and they're trying to meet the standard. And I'm like, okay, that's an issue. You cannot have that. I said, well, it's okay because it's only one account. We all use it. And my mind just went,
Yeah. Yeah.
so, but it's one of those sad stories where they're going for, compliance, and they have to reach a standard or they get less money. And that's what happened. They got less money. I feel
Yeah.
bad for them. And, the CISO was really upset, try to get me to change things on the pen test. But being bound by morals and ethics, we just can't do that. But you'd be surprised how many people, how many companies come to me and say, "I know we failed this pen test. I know we have way too many criticals.
Yeah.
Can we slim that down a little bit? And I think a
Yeah,
platform like yours for pen testing would be great. That way, the data goes in, and that's where it stays. And I
that's
think
right.
there's got to be some kind of submission. I think from the auditing standpoint to I guess the institution or the group of people who run that compliance.
Hmm.
To me, I think it should be a submission by the company of the results of said pen test or audit directly to that committee. And I
Hmm.
think that right now in that chain, I think there are several steps where that could be a benefit.
Yeah, you know, there was a long time, and we can look at financial audits
Yeah,
in a way, right? That's a form of like testing for fraud or issues.
right,
Centuries of technology investment in making that work effectively. But at the end of the day, the certified public accountant was kind of the ivory tower assessor, and they made the decision.
mm,
Computing has allowed us to create information transparency at a scale we've never been able to do in the past. And we see that in lots of industries. And here is another critical one where we don't need to be opaque. Um, we need to have transparent information that creates a more ethical practice for all of us. It's not about you, the pen tester, and me trying to convince you to let me off the hook on a critical. It's
right,
like, hey, this is transparently an issue and we need to solve it. It always boggles my mind a little bit when people are like, let me go argue with the auditor or the pen tester,
right.
unless, within realm, like it's just like their default mode, where it might just be easier to say, okay, we need to provision accounts for everybody.
Yep.
That just seems like the
Simple.
easier answer. Yeah. And then come back and retest for us and we'll have passed that part of the issue. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. But a lot of people, like I say, don't want to do that. It's too much work, and they would much rather pay the fine and keep moving, or
Yeah.
in their case, not get the funding and really hurt and have to lay people off. But
Yeah.
you raised a really important, I think, piece of information when it comes to looking at auditing and auditors and pen testers. We're on the front lines, like facing these companies,
Yeah.
and we're the ones who get beat up on a regular basis when they're trying to reach those compliance or
Yeah.
those standards. And that process, I don't think we'll ever get past that unless we can automate most of that testing.
Hmm.
But I mean, in general, the way I look at AI and the way I look at pen testing, like I have a friend who did a automated pen testing platform at Vonahai, Alton, and Alton did a really great job on this platform. But you still need that human
Yeah.
intuition and analysis for that data. But I think the way that you have your platform set up, the way that you have it, where the data is transparent and each control owner is responsible.
Right.
That transparency, I think, is super important. But I wish it would echo throughout the rest of the operations across the industry.
Yeah. When like when we work with a customer, for instance, and we're testing a control with them, there
Uh-huh.
are really three pieces to the testing. Um, the first piece of the testing is, do they have a mapping of controls to the standards? So is there good coverage? And the second piece of the testing is the control kind of effectively designed? And then the third piece is, do they have samples over the time period showing the control operation happening? Because the system is transparent, it's not you versus the auditor,
Right.
and therefore we're just like, well, the standard says this, we need to meet the standard. We don't want to diminish the value of your SOC 2 certificate or audit in the marketplace, or the value of your pen test because it was done unethically. That's not what you want. No
Right.
one's going to trust you then. And so we have to ensure that that testing is done well. One other thing that always drives me a little nutty as a CTO is like, we talk about automation, but people seem to think about it categorically. Like,
Right.
I have automated all the thing in this category, and that's never true, right? It never works like that. And so I know a little bit about pen testing, just enough to be dangerous. And I'm like, okay, so we can automate some of our Burp Suite scripts, and we can automate some of our port scanning scripts, and there's some open source tools that provide some automation, but configuration of those things cannot be automated.
No,
You need to know what IP addresses am I looking at? What does this application do? Where's the login and where are the forms at a minimum, right? So that
right,
you can get in and test a SaaS-based solution. And then post, you really need a experienced pen tester to interpret the results so you can
right.
go solve them. Yeah.
Yep. And communicate that.
Yeah. So I see investors and companies selling on automation, and I constantly like, what does that mean? What are we talking about here?
Yeah. It reminds me of, like you mentioned AI earlier. That reminds me a lot of discussions of AI, because you hear
Mhm.
people say, we use AI. What exactly do you use? Let's talk
Yeah,
about the algorithm. Is it
yeah.
Bayes' algorithm? Is it a different one? I mean, because a lot of people claim to have AI, but what it really turns out to be is very loosely machine learning.
hmm
So
Yeah.
I could go on for hours about AI. AI is
Well,
what it is.
yeah, I when I first started building quote unquote AI products, I was really loath to use the term because I was like, this is not HAL 2000, 2001 A Space Odyssey. I wanted that computer. This is not it. This is
Yes.
not AI, right? It
Right.
frustrated me. But where I came down on it is that um when we practice machine learning and data science, we are building predictions using data from a pattern matching perspective. And it could be everything Bayesian to random forest to you name the modeling technique, but we're literally building a prediction. When you need to take that prediction and make it consumable by a human being, that is AI. And AI
Right.
is really a user experience issue. Like, how do I design an interface so that you can consume this prediction in such a way that
Right.
it's meaningful to you? And so I've made my peace with it in that way. Yeah.
I've battled with it for so long, the term of AI. So I have a good friend, Max Hennemeyer, that works at Darktrace, and we have a lot of discussions about AI and what
Mhm.
true AI really is and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I have a hard time with AI currently in cybersecurity. And the reason why is because when I deployed a platform that had AI into a bad network,
Yeah.
it's bad already. So I mean, it sees that as normal behavior. Like, what the hell am I supposed to do with this? So you people don't understand this. They get into a bind and they think, oh shit, what do I do? I've got to find a security solution for this problem.
Right.
Instead of fixing the problem from the ground up, from the foundation, they throw AI in, thinking, oh well, I have AI, it's going to fix everything for me. It fixes
That's not
absolutely
the
nothing
case.
for you.
No,
It
no,
makes a prediction, like you said, but it predicts your network is shit because it has been shit. It's not going to
that's
get
right.
yeah.
Yeah. And it can only pattern match on the data it's provided, right?
Right.
So if you provide it poor data or data that's broken, but you say it's good, or like to your point, like I'm monitoring the network for possible incident, but incidents are happening all the time and you're
Right.
not able to tag them, then it can't predict that freaking pattern. It's
Yeah,
just not going to work. Yeah.
it drives me nuts because when someone explained it to me the first time, they said, yeah, so AI looks at a computer and then a computer within a group of computers that are similar, then with network segments that are similar. And I was like, wait a minute. So it's all based off of what normal behavior is for that group of computers.
Right.
So if that group is already infected, then the whole model is screwed.
The whole model's screwed. That's absolutely right. Well, and then if you are a hacker and you want to, I mean, this is a whole new surface area. If there are live models that are constantly
Poison it.
readjusting, yeah, you can get in there and feed it bad data and corrupt the model from the outside. Oh, it's it's a very dangerous thing,
So
actually.
that's kind of a proof of concept I'm working on right now. So I'm really interested in AI and the future of technology. So what I've done is I've started to put together a behavior, right, to introduce into AI into
Yeah,
an environment as an attacker to poison that environment to make it think that, okay, this is what's going on, but in the background, this is actually what's going on.
right.
Because it only knows how to predict previous behavior, so it sees that previous behavior and classifies it completely different than what I'm doing.
hmm
So, I mean, there's, like you said, there's ways to poison and trick AI. And I think AI in general, once the bad guys get their hands on it and get a really good grasp on the power of AI,
Yeah.
I think the world is going to change quite drastically.
I think data scientists and engineers need to really start being aware of this type of thing.
Hmm.
I mean, maybe I was in the same space back in '98 as we were building our first online software and we didn't lock down a couple ports that we should have or things like that.
Hmm.
Um, Similarly, they're going to need to take security into mind. And I think what they don't like is what's going to be asked of them is to not make these things automatically updating their predictions.
Right.
Someone needs to monitor it and be like, I take this test data and I take our latest model, and every day we check them and see if the pattern matching algorithm is working as accurately as it was before. And if it's wildly off base, then I need to look at what's happened to our model.
Yeah. When I discuss AI with friends and people I meet, I usually make the comparison or the analogy of having a child, right? So when you have a child, you're building that mind and you're helping form the way it thinks and the way it looks at the world. So in AI, you're doing the same thing, but you're teaching that child how to look at the network and what behavior is good behavior and what's bad behavior. So it's realistically like raising a child in a network.
Oh
But
yeah.
a lot of people don't get that. They expect that child to go off on its own, graduate college, get itself out of diapers, and become, a CEO somewhere. It's not
Yeah.
just
It's not
that.
the case. That's how, right?
Yeah,
You know, it's not what we can do today, sadly. Yeah.
exactly. So, what are your thoughts on metaverse and data security and personal security and stuff like that?
Yeah. I am not big bought in. I lived the Second Life revolution a little
Oh,
bit.
yeah,
Yeah. And I saw like a lot of activity go to it. Like folks that I worked in enterprise education space for a while, and folks were really interested in Second Life for setting up, immersive university experiences and stuff. What I have learned from a more of an education perspective on what metaverse or that type of immersive experience can be effective for is that it definitely does minimize distraction.
right,
So if you've got the goggles on and the headphones on and you're interacting and learning, there's more retention, and they've been able to do some studies around that, and it is effective. I don't like that Facebook is running it because they have obviously not been good stewards with data.
right.
They still aren't, and it's still a huge issue to me. And so I certainly am not going to give them my login.
No, no, and you hit the nail right on the head. Facebook has done some questionable things as far as supporting certain political groups and not kicking off terrorist networks from their platform and stuff like that. And it goes back to AI in the wrong hands. I think AI in the wrong hands is a weapon.
Yeah.
And but one thing I am looking forward to with AI is more of the videos of people running into walls and stuff with the goggles on. I think that's gonna be awesome.
That's, those are pretty fun. I want to game with one. Like I would love to game with one, but I'm not gonna put something together like the equipment without a company that I think treats my data as private
Right,
and really, I'm there to buy. I'm happy to pay for the rig. I don't need you to monetize all my information for
right.
me. Just, let's play a cool video game in a hyper immersive environment would be a blast. That would be a lot of fun. Um, so what's obvious about Meta is that they trained their technology on a business outcome of more eyeballs and clicks. And sadly, what is true is that people are attracted to kind of catastrophic or danger feeling or conflict. And so it just drives more conflict. And they let it loose. And it was a big issue. Yeah.
Yeah, I look at some of the social media platforms like Facebook and some of that stuff, um, and I look at some of the people that I knew growing up and some of the information that they share, and
Hmm.
I think that's one of the things that drives me away from those platforms.
Yeah.
There's so much misinformation and so much poisonous personalities floating around in that space, and I wish there was something that could clean that up. But unfortunately, that is the future, and the kids that are getting addicted to that now is what's going to drive the internet and cybercrime.
Yeah.
Um, but we also saw, like you brought up, when it first came out, um, the click fraud issue. They're responsible, solely responsible. Those free platforms are solely responsible for click fraud, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very difficult. You know, I think companies are making a marketing expenditure. You know, they are trying to find people that are interested in what they're buying. And then social media platforms that are selling as advertising solutions are just driving around metrics that they think bring in more dollars. But, you know, on some level, maybe today we're seeing a correction in that market. You know, Facebook has taken a huge hit in their valuation,
Mm.
and rightly so. And I think the time of the kind of, it's funny they call it a unicorn because it's a mythical beast, and sometimes I think the valuation is so freaking mythical that it's just like you're insane. And so I'm glad that that's gone because I've enjoyed building businesses that are sustainable, which means they make a profit, which means that they, you know, are around for their customers and our investors and our employees for a long period of time. It's a great point of pride for me. And so it's funny, I've been in a lot of venture capital backed tech startups, but I try to hang on to my old bootstrap ethos. Yeah.
I don't blame you. I don't blame you at all. So if anybody wants to get in contact with StrikeGraph or get in contact with you, how would they do that?
Yeah. So strikegraph.com, our website, is a great place to go. We have a chat there that's staffed by some of our sales team. If you have any questions about compliance, we're happy to answer them. And you can schedule a demo right on the website. Usually a 30-minute demo with us is just a great way to see the solution and talk about the cost and impact for your organization. What StrikeGraph focuses on almost exclusively is making sure that our customers get the certifications that they need to unlock revenue. And then for me personally, LinkedIn is a great way. Sadly, my email inbox is like insane, and so I don't necessarily recommend it. But LinkedIn is probably one of the more relaxed social media environments. I don't
It's one
feel
of
it's sold off. Yeah.
it's one of the more adult platforms, I
Right,
think.
that's probably right. Mike, yeah, none of the kids want to be on it, I guess, or I don't know. Anyways,
It's not cool anyways.
yeah, please connect with me and ping me there. That's a great way to get in touch with me personally.
Cool. Well, Justin, I appreciate it, and would love to have you back on the show sometime soon and go on this discussion again. With that, I'll go ahead and close it out, and I wish you the best luck. Do you have any questions for me or about the haunted hacker community before we go?
Oh, Mike, it's a treat to meet you and the hacker community, and I love these conversations. I really love the idea that we can cross fertilize, you know, what my traditional role as a chief technology officer should understand about ethical hacking and security practices and assessments, and also hopefully we can bring some of this compliance into good security practices, right? What we want is the best of both worlds. Hey, I have a SOC 2 and I believe in the security posture that I got audited on.
100%. I agree. Well, Justin, it's been great, and have a great weekend, and I'll talk to you soon. Thanks.
Talk to you soon, Mike. Thanks. Bye.
Cheers.